Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge, a spoiler-free chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel The Deluge by Stephen Markley. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon. And sorry, darlings, Jesus comes in every podcast episode. Today we are discussing The Ghost in the Mask, set in 2036, the fourth chapter from Keeper's point of view, and the final chapter of Book 4, which we are presenting in the form of a sermon.
That's so good because now I'm like, wait, who is our Jesus? Is it like Marx? Or honestly, in this podcast, it might be like Freud. We do psychoanalysis a lot.
Yes.
Stephen Markley. Yeah.
But without having actually done like Freud, I don't think has been an explicit touch point in the theory, but he's always there.
Yeah, he's the specter. He's the ghost.
Look. Oh, well, we needed Trinity, right? So we got Marx, we've got Freud, and who's our third member of the
guess
Trinity?
Foucault, right?
I guess Foucault is probably correct. Yeah. Concerning one of our main questions, if we ever get to interview Markley, is how much Foucault have you read?
And like, can you tell we both got our PhDs at the CUNY Graduate Center?
Also that. Yep.
Amazing.
You feeling ready to give a sermon?
I think I'm ready. I was born for this.
That's really funny. All right. So sermons, you got to start off with the scripture that you're citing. And I guess I took the theme a little too far because, Emily, my scripture for the day is Giorgio Agamben's The Time That Remains, a commentary on the letter to the Romans.
Wow.
And his discussion of messianic time.
Wow. This is so good. Okay.
I think it's useful to say a little bit about what Agamben means by messianic time. Mm-hmm. So his kind of basic approach in this book is to say that Paul's letter to the Romans, and to some extent some of like Paul's other letters that are contained in the New Testament, for Agamben are the marker and the kind of foundational text of what he thinks is the tradition of messianic time in the West, broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. But that Christianity, as it has been practiced and as it has been developed like quad doctrine, has erased Paul's messianism from the letter to the Romans and from Paul more broadly, right? So what does Giorgio Agamben mean by messianic time? I'm going to actually do some dual quoting. Part of this is me quoting myself and friend of the pod, Joanna Tice-Jen, in an article from about 10 years ago, and part of it is going to be Agamben himself. So I'm going to read from our article, and then I'm going to give you quotes for Agamben himself. Agamben's rendering provides an overview for messianic time, which he sees as organized by the tension between the, quote, already and the not yet, end quote. While messianic time preserves both pastness and futureness, it is, quote, neither the past nor the future, but the inversion of both, end quote. In other words, messianic time is the expectancy, longing for, and actualization of the messianic event, infused with memories of the past and dreams of the future, but also alive in the present. As Agamben writes, the quote, transformation of time is itself implied by messianic time as it clasps together and transforms past and future in an inseparable constellation, end quote. Take a drink for constellation. In Agamben's reading of the Epistle to the Romans, he works through Paul, the Apostle's letter, as the, quote, fundamental messianic text for the Western tradition, end quote. For Agamben, the time of messianism, quote, contains within itself another time. It is ecstatic, lying beside itself without ever coinciding with a chronological instant, end quote. Messianic time is the ecstatic remnant, a constitutive and coextensive tension between the already and the not yet. Right. So Agamben is trying to think through the way that time is kind of folded back in on itself within this messianic tradition. There's a lot to be said about like Agamben in relationship to Benjamin on messianism. Okay, well, what does Agamben and Agamben on messianic time and temporality do for this chapter? It struck me that not only is it a funny joke to me to choose Agamben writing about St. Paul the Apostle for a keeper chapter that involves a lot of Andrade and includes an Andrade sermon itself, but I think there's ways in which some of our discussions throughout, and particularly the way you paid attention to temporality, speaks to like a little bit of kind of playing with messianic time in the novel itself. Although certainly there's also then this meta commentary that I'm going to point out, but not go into, that us talking about this on a spoiler-free basis while knowing where knowing where the novel ends is itself this tension between the already and the not yet, kind of in the practice of the podcast. So anyway, Keeper talks.
What does that imply about us? Who are we?
I think that makes us St. Paul.
Okay. I think I'm here for
it. We can retain our Freud, Marx, Foucault, Holy Trinity, and just be their messenger on Earth.
Oh boy.
So Keeper talks, this is like on 617, about the way that he experiences like kind of multiple lives all at once, or that like there are these different points across his life at which it feels like another life, which I think has some of this kind of messianic time that's part of it. I think that the way that Andrade's sermon and Keeper's memories collapse in on one another, and the fact that Keeper's memories, and there's this like structure of disclosure in Keeper's memories in this chapter that kind of give us a little bit of like what is inevitably going to come, while taking some time to unspool itself or something like that, is part of this. And like Andrade then in 620 calls on the beginning of Christianity as a revolutionary movement, and his kind of like defense to his congregation of his relationship with the Immigrant Defense Council and Fierce Blue Fire. And he actually does cite Paul, albeit 2 Corinthians rather than the letter to the Romans. And so like that's, I think Andrade has a little bit of messianism in him. And then Keeper's temporality of like him being saved as this kind of discontinuity that he's always trying to both get back to, but also reach the point of salvation ability in his life or in his future, so as to have earned in the future this past moment, but do so in the present and like the way he's living his life now, I think has some messianism to it. And then finally, I think that Andrade's description of like what God is at the end also has some of this kind of like messianic power in it. So on 633 on to 634, here is what Andrade says. Think about it this way, Keeper, about what God must actually be: a power vibrating in our every atom, built into the explosions of distant stars and circling the dust of worlds you and I will never be able to contemplate. We are part of some vast, mysterious, eternal whole, set in motion by a force so awesome that it is ultimately unknowable. Do you feel me? We can't always see the direction or meaning of it all, but to even glimpse this tiny corner of the whole, what an incredible opportunity. What a grave responsibility, end quote, which is just an incredible paragraph of writing, and some of the best preaching that I've heard in my life as well from Andrade in that moment. But there's something about Andrade situating him and Keeper in this snowy field after Keeper like expresses that he's not salvageable, after expressing that he's not savable, after expressing that he's not worthy of the care that Andrade gives to him, or Andrade and Ginny give to him. Like then that moment, Andrade situates them with the explosions of distant stars, with the dust of worlds we can never contemplate, with a power vibrating right now, with an eternal whole right now that also has this relationship to the past, but all of it is kind of unknowable or directionless or meaningless in the future. And the fact that that implies some moment of action in the present, or some, in Andrade's words, responsibility taking in the present, to me strikes me as kind of what is the political edge of Agamben or Benjamin's discussion of messianism, which is to say it's not to establish an eschatology in which agency no longer becomes necessary, but an eschatology in which, because of messianic time, action in the present is necessary.
Right.
That's what I think Agamben gives for us.
That is so useful, because I was thinking about that precise tension between the question of agency and responsibility and the question of what's the right frame for that? Like it's already all set, right? Predetermination.
Like determinism, right?
Yeah. That like, I think that tension is here, not even just in the religious moments, but also in the political moments in the chapter, right? It's underlying, I think, some of the conversations he has when he goes to the compound to see about getting hired by these white supremacists. It's there when he goes back to Tarney, right? Tarney's called him, and it's there, like, and like, is there any degree to which anything Keeper can do, like, will actually be him having some say in his own life. And like, what does that mean for him? And like, how far does that extend? I think is like one of the keeper questions, right? But I think framing it like that framing from Agamben seems so useful and like also clever and funny.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will accept. What do you got for your scripture that you're quoting this week?
Okay, so I'm actually going to take us propose that we think about this chapter with Kathy Weeks on the problem with work. Okay, so
I love it. You know, this is a shared member, not a member of the Trinity, but some other important religious figure.
I mean, it's like Weeks is like what's the Jesus God. The disciple. Woo! Couldn't think of that word. Weeks as a disciple of Marx.
Sure.
I'm gonna defend that. Okay, so on 627, Keeper he's been at the compound being interviewed by the white supremacists, and they seem to like basically like him, but they're like, you got to ditch the kid and the woman. And then he doesn't, the only narration we get from him while he's there is the sort of like judgments and observations about the men there, like as men or as people, not really the kind of content of what they're saying. And then when he leaves, he just says, you had to sign some paperwork, right? Some bullshit, blah, blah, blah. He'd always been a fucking idiot, right? This is like Dick Underwood talking about the erotic sex free trade spaces he's going to set up on the borders, right? The brothels on the borders. And then Keeper says, all told, you spent 5 hours on this campus of Fruit Loops. And when you leave, it's like waking from a dream that never happened. You're supposed to report for training in 2 days, which you obviously will not do. You'll treat it how you've treated most jobs since high school. Just don't show. And there's not a whole lot they can do about it. More than the inanity of all these yokels running around jerking off their guns, what you recognize is the danger of any space where someone can tell you what to do, anywhere another human being has power over you. You know this from prison, and especially from your time in the PRCC. So it strikes me that this is like a really interesting way to think about the kind of dimensions of disciplinary power that we've been thinking about in the novel more broadly. And when it comes to like surveillance and technology and like these hyper bloated kind of like, neo-capitalist entities that control so much, right, surplus value and so much and like have a monopoly on the disaster, right?
Yes.
And like benefiting from disaster. But I love that Keeper here actually frames it in the language of the kind of mundanity of just like work, right? So I want to just read from the intro of Kathy Weeks' book where she talks about like why political theory has, or like propose it, like wants to make it a question for political theory that political theory has neglected to really treat work seriously. So this is right in the third page in the introduction. So no, the second page is the one I want to read. That these questions are rarely posed within the field of political theory is also surprising. The lack of interest in representing the daily grind of work routines in various forms of popular culture is perhaps understandable, as is the tendency among cultural critics to focus on the animation and meaningfulness of commodities rather than the eclipse of laboring activity that Marx identifies as the source of their fetishization. The preference for a level of abstraction that tends not to register either the qualitative dimensions or the hierarchical relations of work can also count for its relative neglect in the field of mainstream economics. But the lack of attention to the lived experience and political textures of work within political theory would seem to be another matter. Indeed, political theorists tend to be more interested in our lives as citizens and non-citizens, legal subjects and bearers of rights, consumers and spectators, religious devotees and family members, than in our daily lives as workers. And yet, to take a simple example, the amount of time alone that the average citizen is expected to devote to work, particularly when we include the time spent training, searching, and preparing for work, not to mention recovering from it, would suggest that the experience warrants more consideration. Work is crucial, not only to those whose lives are centered around it, but also in a society that expects people to work for wages, to those who are expelled or excluded from work and marginalized in relation to it. Perhaps more significantly, places of employment and spaces of work would seem to be supremely relevant to the very bread and butter of political science. As sites of decision-making, they are structured by relations of power and authority. As hierarchical organizations, they raise issues of consent and obedience. As spaces of exclusion, they pose questions about membership and obligation. Although impersonal forces may compel us to work, once we enter the workplace, we inevitably find ourselves enmeshed in the direct and personal relations of ruler and ruled. The work site is where we often experience the most immediate, unambiguous, and tangible relations of power that most of us will encounter on a daily basis. So I want to propose that actually Keeper is really attuned to this relationship between the everyday kind of mundane terrain of power and the worst kind of most horrible to think of manifestations of that mundanity, and like deeply attuned to the dynamic between those layers or those levels, that he goes from thinking about this opportunity. He's thinking about it as a job because traditional places of work have been foreclosed to him because having been in prison, right? And not just that he went to prison, but that he took the fall for a terrorist attack, which is in his geographic, context, a no-go, right? It's not just like there are rules saying that felons can't work. It's that there are also social kind of consequences in his particular context to the thing that he was in for. So it's both, they're both working against him, right? He's like not trustworthy in a kind of social sense, but also like on the basis of our general sort of distrust for people who are felons, right? Not who have committed a felony or been convicted of a felony, but who are felons, right? Like in the fabric of their person. And he's wary of what's happening in this potential kind of alternate route. But also part of that wariness is that it is one way of thinking of it is as a workplace, right? Which I think is just so useful. And then that the place that he goes from there is, I know this from prison, right? So it strikes me that one thing that Kathy Weeks does not explore, but that could be interesting, is to what degree thinking about like power, domination, the constitution of the subject in prison, like to think about like how can we use work to think about prison and prison to think about work, right? Or like, what does the frame of the work society let us say about the frame or about the phenomena of kind of like the prison industrial complex and what's constituted there and how domination works there? Because I think, we can think about how expensive it is to go to prison, and Keeper does, right? He says, like, I still owe the state XYZ money for like all the things that you have to pay for when you're incarcerated.
He owes Prion,
not the state.
Yeah.
Yes. Very important. Right. So like the prisoner is not quite a commodity, but it's not quite a producer. Right. And like, so there's something like missing, I think, in that analysis a little bit that maybe we could get at through like thinking about what kind of worker the prisoner is, in the sense that Kathy Weeks is invoking, which is not just in abstraction, but in the kind of like material realities of the everyday life of the worker. And it's, I don't know, it strikes me that maybe like there's some work there to be done, but also that Keeper kind of, and this is maybe like a standpoint epistemology thing, but like Keeper as somebody whose life has been structured by seeking work, leaving work, getting in trouble at work, and then like trying to change something, getting caught in the prison system, right?
Yeah.
And then like trying to work out of it, right? That he knows something that like political theorists don't know about all of these overlapping institutions, structures, and forces of domination, that I think Weeks is opening up like and asking us to consider with serious rigor. And so I think maybe Keeper is like, what's the right right word? Like a non-professional
right.
political theorist, right? In the truest sense of what kind of Weeks is invoking for us. And that's what I want to propose.
I fully accept your proposal. Looks like the Crandall, Browning, McMahon, Kathy Weeks series continues.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's Weeks meets Du Bois and Gilmore, right? Essentially, like in a way that Du Bois is thinking about the continuity of labor and racial capitalism and like Souls of Black folk and then through, Black Reconstruction and on and on and on. I think I'll probably mention Du Bois again later in this episode, but he's there in Golden Gulag, which you pointed out to me you have addressed before in the space of this podcast. Ooh, yeah, it's that continuity that Keeper establishes, and that he is the character for whom we get the best texture of waged labor and the lack thereof.
Yeah,
in this novel, really does provide that standpoint. I love it.
Something that I was thinking about that I forgot to mention when we were prepping, and I'll just throw this out there and we can take it up later if we want to, is like we started Keeper thinking like, wow, Keeper is really different from all the rest of the characters. And then we keep reading Keeper and drawing out these kind of like analogies or points of contact or overlap. But now that we're getting close to the end, I really feel like there is something like distinct about Keeper in the novel, like just as a character, but also how Keeper functions in the novel. Yes. And like what is that is maybe something we still need to think through, but maybe that's for the last Keeper chapter.
Honestly, that's a question we could use to frame all of our last chapters or some bonus episodes.
True. Yeah. We don't want to be done. So
precisely. So now it's just how many excuses for additional eps can we come up with?
Wow. That was a really fun scripture section.
Yeah. We are well read in our various testaments and texts.
Should we pivot to the intro?
Absolutely. What's your summary?
Okay. Oops, I'm on the wrong page. I went with, you are hungry and you recognize the danger of others, of fear, of uncertainty, of hunger. You can't escape from the front lines of the nightmares, and empty feels so much bigger. You are narrow and corporeal and alone.
Oh my God.
Is yours exactly the same?
This is the singularity. You are hungry, and Raquel, literally the same beginning. You are hungry, and Raquel and Toby are hungry, and you cannot touch or be touched. You retain your humor and your highly selective bullshit detector, but you cannot forget. You know empty is so much bigger, and yet you know that maybe there's a power vibrating in every atom in this eternal whole. So we also ended in more or less the same place.
Oh my God. Wow.
It's too much.
I just thought, you said this in the beginning, but I thought the writing in this chapter was incredible.
I'll save my point about that probably for my cultural artifact, but yes.
Man. Okay. Are we missing, I guess our summaries are not very descriptive in terms of plot. So are you missing anything like major from the plot that is important here?
I think we get this chapter. You talk about kind of Keeper's function in the novel and his relationship to the rest of the novel as a whole and to the rest of the characters. There are so many places of here are things connecting or snapping into place in this chapter. Raquel references Ash's call to stop having pets, but instead to eat them.
Yeah.
Right? Prion,
scientist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Data scientist, right, Ash? Prion, which we joked about in a previous interlude because I had forgotten what it was and you had forgotten what it was, is the prisoner management capital extraction company, a centerpiece of this chapter. There's this loop back to 6 Degrees, including to the conversations that Shane and the other principals had about what to do about their patsies, John Gerald included.
Yeah.
And then there is a metric ton of cryptic foreshadowing that we probably should not get into for Keeper, but not just Keeper in the rest of the novel, I think is maybe what we can say.
Great. Yeah. And even the way that we get Keeper going back to Tarney is like hidden from us, right? He shows up somewhere and you think maybe he's going to score. And it turns out that Tarney called him, right?
Yes.
And said, I want to talk to you about something.
Yes.
Yeah.
One last mission. One last job.
One last mission. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And then we learn a lot more about how which one is this one called? The American Patriot League? No.
The American Patriot League is the federation of the various white nationalist groups, including, I think we're meant to know this is the Ohio Lightfoot.
Oh, yeah.
From the previous Keeper chapter.
I couldn't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
So we get an extended kind of look at what that compound is. It's mostly, right, like kind of slapped together buildings and structures. There are lots of young guys there, right, living in kind of barracks, essentially.
So many firearms.
So many guns. Yeah, so many guns.
And food, crucially.
Right. And the thing that they want him to do is recruit, which I think is a very...
outside of high schools. Middle schools and high schools, right?
Yeah. So brutal. We also get, I think this is an important, it's like plot point, but I'm sure we'll get to it in other like lessons and stuff too. But like, I think it's important to note that Prion is not just like the company that is managing the prisoners, but it's also like in charge of clearing, or has, I don't know, like taken the job of clearing out all the natural disasters. So the way that Keeper buys his freedom is by agreeing to serve for 3 years on this in an extraction crew. So he hasn't actually been in prison when we've been away from him. He's been in LA. He's been all over
Colorado, the Gulf Coast, the Midwest. Yeah.
Like cleaning, literally pulling bodies out of the wreckage of all these disasters.
Described in many, many different ways of decomposition and disgust.
Yeah. So brutal. Okay.
I think you have a bit of levity for us.
I do.
In this levity lacking chapter. Actually, that's not true. It's a hilarious chapter in a fucked up ways, but
yeah, all the Keeper chapters are kind of like that, but this one in particular, I think. Okay, so the chapter is called "The Ghost and the Mask," and while we were finishing our last our recording of the chapter previous, I was like, oh, 2 films that have nothing to do with this book, and like films that are also like, one is explicitly a comedy and the other has attained like status as a kind of cult comedy because of its ridiculousness. I don't know, was Ghost intended to be a comedy? Like,
it's a wonderful question.
Have you seen it?
No, I've never seen it.
So I once went to, there is like a fancy restaurant on the Upper East Side that was doing a series of like film screenings that were paired with like a dinner. And we used to play movie trivia, and someone on our trivia team was like, do you guys want to go see this screening of Ghost? It's like a 3-course meal and there's like a big projector. And we were all like, what? Okay, sure. And it was such a weird experience because the movie's hilarious, but it's like, just the way that it's pitched is really like confusing. So you're sort of like, am I supposed to be laughing at this? Is this supposed to be evoking, what emotion is this supposed to be evoking in me? But the premise is that Patrick Swayze dies. He gets hit by like a subway train, I think. And then like he's trying to get Whoopi Goldberg, the medium, to like tell his girlfriend that he's in danger. And so it's like, and Whoopi Goldberg doesn't want to do it. She's like a resistant medium. But like it raises this question of like, you know, can we commune with the dead? Like, what is our connection? What is the connection between the dead and the living? Does it, you know, like, is it something we can tap into? Is it something we can access? And like, it's a little tropey. Like Whoopi Goldberg has a bit of magical, you know, like she's the one with the connection to the spirit world, and all the other characters are white. It's like a bit of that, but she's also a bit of herself, and like very kind of funny and sarcastic, and takes on the role in a way that makes it feel less tropey, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And then The Mask is obviously like a explicit comedy. Right. So I rewatched it last night just for fun.
A more devoted podcaster than I.
Jim Carrey discovers a mask that what is the type of a scholar that he goes to. It's a guy who wrote a book on masking. So I think he's supposed to be like a psychoanalyst, but he also has like a collection of old masks, and he like knows, he's able to recognize the artifact and like say that it's like a 4th century Scandinavian mask. So I'm like, is he also like an archaeologist? Like
a Claude Levi-Strauss following anthropologist, maybe?
Kind of, yeah, but maybe that would make sense. But his book on masking is about like the masks we wear, right? Like that is our way of kind of mediating between the id, the ego, and the superego, right? So masking is like the cultivation of the ego so that we can live kind of successfully in society or whatever. And he uses those terms he uses it, I think, explicitly, but then he talks mostly about like instincts, impulses, and then like the self that we present to others.
Yeah.
Which I think is hysterical. But then he also recognizes this mask as like 4th century Scandinavian masks. And he hypothesizes that it's once belonged to Loki. So Jim Carrey thinks like, and then he says, Loki was famously banished from Valhalla for being too mischievous. And so Jim Carrey goes, so he was banished so he could be like in the mask. And then the professor is like, I don't mean literally. I'm talking about masking in the abstract, but like the clearly the magicalness is that like this is supposed to be Loki, kind of like Loki's essence as in the mask, and then he gets to take on and assume the body of whoever wears it. So Jim Carrey is like kind of dorky. He's like a romantic, but he has trouble kind of pursuing the women that he's interested in, and the mask gives him like confidence. And then and then he like really interestingly, he works at a bank, and there's a plot to rob the bank, right? Cameron Diaz is sent in as the kind of like scout, but she's like, flirts with him, and he's like falls in love with her. But so you think that she's like a typical kind of femme fatale, like bad woman. But then there's another woman who's sort of like a little more sensibly dressed, and she's supposed to be intelligent. She's a journalist, and she ends up kind of being like more like explicitly bad, right? Like she eventually helps the guy who really wants to rob the bank, like find Jim Carrey. So there's all these like layers and kind of in like a little bit of an inversion of those sexist tropes.
Would you say the movie masks itself?
I would say perhaps it does, which is a question. There's a question for us about the mask and masking in the Deluge. But like so it's like, who is he really is a question that he and Cameron Diaz kind of take up, because she's like, oh, I think I'm interested in the man beneath the mask. And he's like, but you wouldn't know the man beneath the mask if it wasn't for me wearing the mask. And like, even the professor says at one point, like, he's like, I just need to know, should I meet her as me or with the mask? And the professor's like, if I tell you, will you leave my office? And then he says, like, you should go as you and the mask, because you and the mask are one and the same, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's like just saying that to get him out of his office. But I think it's an interesting way to think about actually what you were raising with Keeper, like trying to trace kind of who he is across these timelines that are folding in on each other. Like, was it me that was saved, or was it me who was like taking on ever increasing dangerous assignments in this like horror, like literal hellscape? Like, do I even want to get out of this? Do I even want to come home? And who is it that returned? Like I can't touch or be touched. Right. And so like, I think there's a question that the mask as a frame is offering us as a way to think about another way to think about what Keeper is struggling with and how he lives with or deals with suffering. Mm-hmm. And then I think like to tie in the different layers of kind of like non-Christian spirituality between the two films, right? Yes. So this question of like, what is our relationship to the dead? What do we owe the dead? Or what does the dead owe us or not owe us, right? Which Andrade in part of the sermon that you read, even frames as an ecological question, right? Like
sure
the planet. Does. And like Loki is, I think, not like, I didn't want to go too into Norse lore, but like Loki as a god is one of the Norse gods that doesn't have like as explicit of a connection to like some dimension of what we might think of as non-human nature as some of the other gods. You know, some of them are like gods of storms or gods of whatever, and he's a god of mischief, which is kind of like an anthropomorphized, right? Like terrain, right? We think of mischief as kind of about like humanness, right? It's like where, you know, reason or our ability to control our actions and determine our fates like comes up against our instincts and our impulses or something like that. And so that these two movies could be kind of comedic frames for the really serious sort of Christian question that Markley is floating for us, for me, raises a question about Markley and Markley's engagement with religious stuff in this book more broadly. Like, does Markley believe in God, A, and or is he sympathetic to people who do? And like, what kind of person of faith is he sympathetic to, and why? Is a question that I think a comedic reading of these two films as a frame for this chapter raises for us.
Yes. I mean, Andrade is potentially an answer to that last question, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Andrade is meant to be read as a little bit of a hero or Christian warrior type or social justice, you know, Christianity, like social justice strands within Christianity.
But I think he has kind of loosey-goosey, you know.
Yes, like there's a little mysticism.
Yeah. Like part of the whole could be like Whoopi Goldberg, like channeling, right? Like Patrick Swayze. Part of the whole could be like Loki actually helping Jim Carrey kind of reconcile to some degree these like facets of who he is that seem to be at odds with one another, right? Like I think that like maybe this is another character that's a proxy for Stephen Markley.
I love that.
Okay, that was long. I'm sorry.
Spoiler alert, they're all proxies for Markley. We're going hard against the death of the author here. Maybe two other points about The Mask to build on that superb reading that took the task we assigned ourselves much more seriously than I did. One is that I think part of what The Mask and my hazy memory and reading of its Wikipedia page yesterday pointed out is this question of misrecognition and what it means to be misrecognized. And that there's something about Keeper who simultaneously wants to experience recognition and is also, I think, very happy to be misrecognized for who he is or what his life means among people with varying levels of emotional intimacy. That there's something about the kind of misrecognition and how purposeful misrecognition might be that is raised by, I'd forgotten the whole professor plot from The Mask because I'd seen it, you know, when I was 10 or 11 or 12 or whatever it was. So that was a joyful experience last night to discover that the ghost of Cloud Levy Strauss is there to explain it all. But my second point about The Mask is that Siskel of Siskel and Ebert said about The Mask, quote, according to Wikipedia, quote, the latest example of technique overriding the written word in an American film, end quote, which obviously I think raises question. He was concerned that The Mask is an example of that. And so it struck me that this is a technique-filled novel that is trying to suture together technique and the written word in American literature. Yeah,
I mean, mic drop.
Thank you. So my cultural artifact is the novel A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. So there's some thematic content, and I might touch on it briefly, but just the notion of what does it experientially feel like to read this Keeper chapter or maybe Keeper chapters in general, to me, struck me in a corporeal sense to be a very similar experience and affective experience and like intellectual affective experience of reading A Little Life, which like gets a lot of shit, some of it earned, for being in the kind of moment of everything is about trauma of popular culture. But I think is nonetheless a really excellent novel. If one can bring themselves to stomach it and read it, which I don't blame people for if they're just like, I'm out on it. No, thank you.
My friends from college who all really love that kind of fiction describe it as loving the experience of being devastated.
That's exactly right. Because I think that there's something about that particular attraction to the revulsion or the attraction to the being shattered that thematically is, and perhaps an undertone in both A Little Life and in Keeper chapters, but is more accurately a depiction of or description of the reading of those two things. And certainly like there is a part of me that is drawn to that, like engagement with the shattering in whether it's film or novels or TV or music or whatever the case might be. But then moreover, there's this way in which like A Little Life and Keeper have this kind of structure of who are the characters from different walks of life, to be very cliche about it, that are going to be interacted with at various points in the plot, such as it is of the two novels, in ways that the main character, Keeper or Jude, in A Little Life, like are incapable, are analyzing very deeply, and nonetheless like incapable of fully understanding to themselves like what it means to build emotional intimacy while also building emotional intimacy is, I think, a part of both novels. This is very much tied to just like the saturation of this Keeper chapter, of Keeper's experience, both as like perpetrator and, you know, victim or survivor of sexual assaults in this novel, and in Jude and A Little Life. So on the experiential level, more than anything else, like I think that A Little Life is what reading this Keeper chapter feels like.
Wow, that's really good. I never read that one, in part because I don't have a strict aversion to being devastated, but things of that length that require that much emotional investment, I'm usually like, I don't know if I can sort of like psychically and emotionally make the space for that. But
yeah, it's not a short novel.
Right. A lot of people who kind of like tastes in books, I really respect it. Really, really love that book in spite of I think some of the criticism that you were talking about there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my parable, but perhaps more literal parable than an actual parable. I
think that also helps me think about, though, why like I love the Keeper chapters so much. I think there's something about like Markley's writing in these chapters, and maybe it's like his proximity to that character. You know, we talked about his first novel, Ohio, I think in the first Keeper chapter or second Keeper chapter.
Which is now sitting on my bedside table along. Yeah. Not the only novel that you've brought up that is in this podcast that's now on my bedside table.
But maybe it's something about that like this is the most personal, maybe like point of view in some way to Markley, or I don't think Keeper as a proxy for Markley works, but I think like if maybe like it's a love letter, a sad, like heartbroken love letter to the Midwest or something like that.
And it's also a question of, for Keeper, what the mode of address of you as opposed to, because I think there's a tendency to often understand novels written in the first person as having the ability, realized or not, to more deeply emotionally like touch or shatter or relate to a reader. But I think Markley is a little bit performing the experiment of what if actually it's the second person rather than the first person that has the ability to most do that.
Yeah. Did you ever read any Tom Robbins?
Tom Robbins is
Pretty Legs and All, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, or Skinny Legs and All, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, Jitterbug Perfume.
I think, Jitterbug Perfume I read.
Yeah. So he was like one of my favorite writers as a teen, and I picked one up this year because he died in January. I reread it, and it was like so fucking good. I want to go back and reread them all. But he has one book that's in the second person that is like far and away, I think, his most clever book. And it's like an action driven book way more than the rest of his books. So there's like a kind of anxiety to it because you are the person doing the action.
Yep.
And it's like really, really fascinating. Just I think to exactly like a fascinating experiment. I think experiment's like exactly the way to frame that.
And I think it's worth celebrating Markley for pulling off a series of writing experiments that cohere together.
Yeah, totally. Have we sufficiently parabolized?
I think we have. Should we make some corny attempts at humor that are also of questionable taste?
Yes. I mean, this is how you connect with your congregation, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What jumped out to you?
The pitifulness of these white supremacists alongside how terrible they are. And there's something like the mundane and spectacular that we've been paying attention to throughout the novel. So Keeper describing them as, even before he's met them, Underwood and his butt buddies playing like they're going to start the next American Revolution.
Yeah.
Honestly, Dick Underwood, still an LOL all on its own, halfway between a bustling military boot camp for teenagers and a sad music festival that couldn't sell half its tickets.
Yep.
That so they're good. Like just yokels running around jerking off their guns.
They also
campus of Fruit Loops,
yeah, and that his like narration of listening to the captain talk, where he's like visibly suppressing yawns and like he's so clearly enamored with himself, right? There surely believes there's no way a person could sit across from him, hear this pitch, and not jack off at what a brave and charismatic leader he is. Just like that really got me stuff. So good. Yeah,
the tattoos that people have or that people are getting.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of other humor in this chapter for me aside from that section.
Oh, I will beg to disagree. So the rest of it's okay. So there's Little Twit Hotshot Lawyer is the lawyer that 6 Degrees sent is a great Keeper line and a really funny description of like the kind of slick lawyer that they would have sent.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple just like very, I can't believe this is so funny to me. Keeper talking about when he sees the dogs at the white supremacist compound, whether they know he ate, quote, pieces of their kin on the way up is actually pretty funny.
That's good.
I would suggest. And then there's Andrade coming through at the end of the chapter with, after Keeper essentially like admits to having survived several sexual assaults, and like accusing Andrade of grooming him for that very purpose. Andrade says, well, let's go for a walk. And at the end of inviting him for a walk says, plus it's too cold out there for me to lure you into performing fellatio.
Yeah.
Which is the first time Keeper can remember himself laughing.
Yeah.
After his really initial revulsion. Yeah. Or anger.
And like even the narration of Keeper realizing it's a joke is also funny, right? Fucking Reverend Andrade just made an actual joke, and despite yourself, you snort one true laugh. Yeah, I liked that too.
Yeah. Oof. Should we get to the lesson? Should we leave the leave the congregation with?
Let's do it. The very heavy, very easy, digestible lesson.
Definitely.
Where should we start?
I think you had a bit of and you've raised this a couple of times and we came across it in both, I think, our parable and our scripture, because this is a very cohesive sermon, is the issue of agency and responsibility that recurs in Keeper's chapter. But what about that in this particular Keeper chapter kind of most struck you?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. So 2 passages you've read in thinking about the kind of the messianic time dimension of this chapter, both talk about responsibility, right? And this is Andrade in both instances, right? What a grave responsibility on 634. And then in his actual sermon, right, the responsibility that comes with freedom, right, that he frames as an ecological question or an ecological responsibility.
Right.
That was
responsibility as Christians, as Americans, but first and foremost as human beings of free will on a just and gorgeous planet.
Yeah. Responsibility as humans of free will, which is a really interesting kind of frame there too.
Yes.
And then the other thing that Reverend andrade said that I thought was really, really, really interesting is on page 633, right? I certainly understand the allure. He's talking about the compound, right? Powerlessness causes us to seek power any way we can. We'd sacrifice anything, particularly our conscience, to feel it. There is nothing more dangerous than the excitement of those suffering from a lack of agency and a great bitterness of soul.
Yes.
I think that's so useful for Andrade to pitch directly to Keeper, because it's a way to explain a little bit Keeper's reaction to his own suffering, while at the same time not giving him like a way out of like needing to be present and needing to do something, right? So to say you've suffered and like suffering is XYZ, right, is a little bit to alleviate the kind of agentic component of like, how do you live in a world where there is suffering, A, and B, where you have suffered, right?
Yes, both parts, definitely.
And so I think this idea that like a lack of agency is both a symptom of suffering, but also like a cause is maybe one way to think about it. And that like the way out isn't to just like submit blindly to some like power that tells you what to do and to like abnegate agency, right? The way out is to claim it, is I think what Reverend Andrade is saying. And I wonder if that's not a parable for like how difficult the question of responsibility is when it comes to climate change, and especially as it relates to something like a messianic time problem for climate change, right? Because like part of the difficulty of like doing something about climate change is that like the lifespan of individual humans who take actions is out of pace with the lifespan of climate disaster.
Yes, absolutely.
And so like we can say there's nothing we can do because, right, like we are suffering. Or like we are suffering because there's nothing we can do, right? Either way. And like we still ought to do something.
Yes. Yes.
And I think for Andrade to frame it as a question about like integrity in oneself is a really, and to not like to only kind of flag its relationship to planetary time is, I think, really clever. And that like he doesn't have to take up the political question of like why he, you know, gives money to a Fierce Blue Fire or takes money from a Fierce Blue Fire, or like it doesn't have to be a political question for him. It's just this question of kind of like ethical, that we have an ethical obligation to act, right? Is how he's framing responsibility, not as a political question. And I think that's useful.
That strikes me as an extremely resonant way to which agency is explored in Parable of the Sower, in which there's, I forget, I wish I had the exact quote, but I think it's Lauren in Parable of the Sower who makes the almost exact same point that Andrade made in the place where you started about like what like dominate the relationship between powerlessness and the desire or drive to domination. And then Lauren, of course, is always interested in what responsibilities to oneself, nature, others, community, change itself is flowing from even this condition of powerlessness.
Yeah. And what's the relationship between those obligations, right? To what degree does the responsibility we have to ourselves require a responsibility to others or to nature or to the planet or
to God, which is
or to God. Yeah.
I think Keeper, one of the ways that we get some of these questions about agency or responsibility is Keeper strikes me in his self-narration as a slightly different subject than at other points throughout the novel, I think. Yeah. I mean, at other points, he like almost can't help himself. But like the narrative style at times seems a little bit less self-loathing. At times it seems like not quite calm, but slightly less frenzied than elsewhere. And Andrade, I think, towards the end of the chapter, like gives him some mechanisms in which Keeper might understand himself changing. And Andrade, and I appreciate Markley doing this more than thinking it's too clever or whatever, frames this explicitly in terms of Keeper's redeemability or not.
Yeah.
Structurally, the novel, and this chapter in particular, puts a lot of tests in front of Keeper, right? He sticks with the pastor despite all the shit. Or excuse me, he sticks with Andrade despite all the shit that Andrade gets. He rejects the pastor despite the pastor's appeal in the social fabric and social and geographic fabric of where he lives. He sees through all of the bullshit of the white supremacist Ohio Lightfoot American Patriot League on several levels. And yet there's also, a reminder, I think, of Keeper addressing the sexual assault he commits in the first book, in his first chapter, right towards the end of the chapter. And so Andrade and Keeper and their kind of multiple interactions over the course of this are, I think, raising the agency and responsibility question to also this question of redeemability and relationship to the self. Because so it's not just, what obligations of responsibility do I have because of my position, partial though it might be as an agent, but that those are raised also to questions of what does that say about myself? What does that say about my redeemability? And here's my weird Du Bois point that I think the book is genuinely interested in Keeper's redeemability or in redemption in a religious sense, but also a moral sense. And in a way that struck me as I was thinking about this chapter this morning after rereading it yesterday, that is not dissimilar from the way that Du Bois is interested in redemption in Souls of Black Folk.
Interesting.
Because for him, it's an open question, is America morally redeemable? I think is an open question in Souls in a way that the answer becomes no over the rest of Du Bois's life and career and writing and theorizing and philosophizing. But there's something about the openness of that question and the insistence on, in Souls, I think subtly, but constantly coming back to that question. And we as readers of a novel with a quote unquote complicated character are, I think, prone to ask questions of redemption, which Markley then internalizes into the actual text of the novel itself. And I don't know, there's something about the way, the structural position of redemption that was just making these connections to me. And I'm thinking about Du Bois a lot anyway, so all the time.
I think that that's really great too, because maybe we're also supposed to interrogate our anticipation of his redemption
or desire for it.
Yeah. And this chapter in that sense kind of takes you on a little bit of a roller coaster ride because you don't know at first when he gets to the compound whether he's going to see through it. And he only gives you kind of glimpses into what it is he's seeing. He's making these funny observations about it, but we still don't know exactly what he's going to do because he has been historically unpredictable.
Yes.
So when he says, you're obviously not going to go, I think that that's actually not obvious to the reader. We hope that it's true. And then when he says you obviously won't go, we feel this sense of relief, right? We're oh, thank God he's not going to go, right? This is what we hoped for him. And then he keeps coming up against the edge of what we hope for him and then walking away, right? He's angry with Toby. They're both angry with Toby when the mac and cheese spills, right? But then you don't know how he's going to handle the asthma attack, right?
Right.
And he handles it really beautifully, right?
Yes. And Andrade, again, is the kind of conscience here.
Yeah.
Because he asks him, essentially, have you ever hit or abused Toby? Right?
Yeah.
And, not in a not so veiled way. I think crucially at that moment, Keeper says to Andrade, this is the bottom of 631, why are you doing this? You demand. Why are you always helping me? And okay, that's a question that Keeper, I think, is deeply true to his core self, to Andrade.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, a little bit a question of Markley to himself and to us as readers.
Yeah. Why are we doing this? Yeah.
Why are we doing this, reading the novel or talking about it for dozens of hours? Or why are we so invested in Keeper and the question of, if we are, of what kind of redemption might or might not be available to him?
Also, the reveal that like he's telling this story, I think the end is really, really interesting too, because when he starts in with the last story that he tells, and this is the only story we get from him about his time on the extraction committee where he's telling it out loud. The other ones we all get through narration.
Yeah.
This is dialogue. Mm-hmm. And he says, I've done so many awful, awful things. People I don't even know or couldn't even find again to tell him I'm sorry, tell him what I did was evil. How am I supposed to believe God can forgive me? That would just be me wishing there was a way I could even get forgiven. And then the story he tells is not a story about him doing something bad.
No.
But it's just something that is eating him alive, right? Yeah. So, and that's an interesting pivot too. And then when you get the mirror, right? Like he looks up, he's crying and he looks up and Reverend Andrade's crying, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, you're surprised to see that he's also crying, right? And like, that's when we get the kind of rumination on redeemability.
Yeah.
It's just like really chilling.
I've got chills again, after reading this 3 or 4 times and now talking about it again.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that like the closing lines there go back to like the landscape, the description of the horizon, and the phrase "becoming" just like really jumped out of me there. I was like, Mark Lee's playing with us, man. Like, just get a little existentialism in there. Yeah.
The descent of night, which looks like a pool of mercury spilling across the heavens.
Yeah. It's so beautiful.
I mean, this goes back to what you were talking about with regards to like what your friends had said about A Little Life, like kind of loving the devastation.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to say any more about suffering? And we've talked about it a little bit, but I think it's just this to my mind is like the first place I think in the novel where it's an explicit question, like, why do we suffer? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really interesting. 'Cause like it seems, I think it's a question in a big sense, but it's also like, why do shitty things happen to some people and not to others, right? Like, why are some people victims of capitalist exploitation and other people are victims of sexual assault, right? Like, why? Yes. And then like, what does it mean to suffer is, I think, the bigger question that makes the religious framework, I think, urgent, even if for me as a person who is not particularly religious, it sometimes feels sort of inaccessible, but not inaccessible, but like, I don't know what the word is. I'm like, I want to
hypothetical.
Yeah. Hypothetical. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
As similarly, as a similar relationship to religion, but like oddly find myself engaging with a lot of like art that has to do with religion.
Yeah.
Over the past several years.
Tons. Yeah.
And like finding deep meaning in it, including the depiction of religion. Mm-hmm. There's, go listen to Not Quite Great Books on Young Pope if you want to hear more about that.
I love that.
Jesus Christ. The writing of Keeper, like narrating what for him being raped meant, and his response to it is, I think, some of the most painfully heartbreaking, like grab you to your core writing that's possible. I want to read a couple of these lines, but it's like, I don't know, is it overkill to do that?
I think you can read a couple lines. Yeah.
All right. So this is 628. The siren was going off in your head. Not happening, not happening, not happening. But it was. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Floating until your mind went blank and you went somewhere else. Floating through cold space without an astronaut suit. The next day, you got a letter in the mail from Raquel, and she included a picture Toby drew of his hand, transformed into a Thanksgiving turkey with hearing aids. The picture said, "Hi, Daddy." It was enough to make you want to fucking kill yourself. Jesus. And then like he goes on to narrate the way that he kept on taking the most dangerous parts of the most dangerous recoveries in an attempt to do that.
Yeah.
Not going to read any more just because that's plenty, but
that reminds me too of like one note that I had made about the prose that like there's a viscerality to, I think, some of Keeper's prose that is not as present in some of the other chapters. Like the descriptions of him walking, right? Mm-hmm. The boots are crunching, or like there's a hole in his boot and there's squelching. There's like a lot of really almost like it's sort of like a literary version of an onomatopoeia. It's like a phrase that makes you feel like you're experiencing or hearing the noise that it's describing kind of in real time, which I think is really, it's a kind of knowledge, right? That's different from his like whatever kind of cognitive analytic processing he might be doing or not doing about the world around him. He's like observing the tactility of his person, like in the world doing things at the same time as he has these really big, maybe hypothetically unanswerable questions about like what it is he is doing and why it is he's doing it and who is doing the doing, who it is that is doing the doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And it strikes me, I think you're right that there's a more viscerality here, and it's more so than all of the other main characters of the novel, for sure. And it's in part due to their different like life circumstances. It's in part due to their different senses of self, in part due to the different writing styles of those other chapters. But it does strike me that the other character for whom I bet we get the most visceral writing from or about is Kate Morris. Like I'm thinking about some of the descriptions, and some of these is describing himself, but like Matt and Kate on the hikes, or the siege, like those are the places that I think the writing in that particular way is most resonant with the viscerality of the Keeper chapters.
Yeah. I want to just read one sentence from the page you were just on this, because I think it's really like, it was a sentence that to me really crystallized a kind of sense I was getting of the prose more broadly. But this is on 628. The vibrations from the jackhammer in your arms, the nosebleeds you get from the dust, the shriek of a metal saw, the glowing sparks landing in the ruins, a piece of concrete wall suddenly collapsing, crushing that short guy from Arkansas who you'd bummed a cigarette from just an hour earlier. Like, I feel like I could like the world of the novel was like vibrating in my mind while I was reading that.
Yeah. This is way too clever, but we just had this episode on the sensory news X-Spear. Here is Mark Lee doing sensory writing
news.
the most that is possible without your VR headset.
Yeah. I love that.
Should we talk more about the white supremacists at all?
Yeah.
I mean, again, there's the matter-of-factness and the cheerfulness alongside the terror that they embody, that they want to impose upon others, that strikes me as part of this mundane spectacular, right, play that Mark Lee has been doing throughout the entirety of the novel. Like, it is a terrifying time at the Patriot League headquarters. It's their plans, it's the weaponry they have, it's how much money they clearly have. It's like how matter of fact the captain is. It's Dix Underwood's terrifying plan. It's the like noosed plastic dolls of Victor Love and Mary Randall and Kate Morris that are hanging from the fucking trees. That Keeper, Mark Lee, the reader, Mark Lee creates this mechanism to like deconstruct at the same time that he is constructing how terrifying they are.
Yeah. And there's a bit of a mystery there too, right? Like, we learn that there's a lot of money coming in from somewhere.
We got some clues during the siege, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like the militias are getting federal money, guns, and weaponry and material.
Yeah. So it's like what it portends to, is it going to be mundane or spectacular, is an open question.
Yeah.
Because there's something even to their like envisioning of what's next that's a little ridiculous, right? It's like Dick Underwood's like, oh, the Great Lakes are going to be it. Once we get all these people of color out of here, we're going to have this. It's just like a kind of like frontier Wild West imagining, like we're going to reestablish the frontier and like start the economy over with just white people. Like, that's a kind of a dull like imagining of what's to come, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think part of the absurdity of that vision is also that, how different is this vision from like the vision that like Charles Manson was proclaiming about like race war, like the like circles he ran in and the followers he had.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah. I don't have anything else.
Okay, I want to just say one little bit about this last theme for me of kind of like intergenerationality.
Please.
I thought that it was really interesting to have Keeper kind of remark on parenting in the same chapter where he's struggling with his both self-definition, but also with this question of agency and responsibility. He says in a couple places like that he doesn't understand kind of Toby in a way that seems kind of like fundamental, but also that it's like a commentary on like the limits or like the what feels insurmountable like psychologically about the idea of parenting itself. Like it's not just like Toby as a little kid is particularly inaccessible to this one particular adult. It's like a commentary on like how like parenting is something that is supposedly natural, but like we don't understand it at all, even while we're immersed in it and doing it, including like why we're doing it, what we're doing, what's it all for, right? And like what is the outcome going to be, which I think is sort of what it's like a different way of thinking about what Ash is dealing with, a different way of thinking about the tensions in Shane's chapters, and even a different way of thinking about the fight that Jackie got in with her ex in the last Jackie chapter that we just did.
Or the fight that Kate and Matt got into, and had over the long course of their relationship.
And so I think that my new kind of like hot take on this book is that actually parenting and the question of parenting as both like, should we do it? Why do we do it? What does it mean? But also as a really big ethical intergenerational question of what do we owe one another is, I think, far more central to this book than I had realized on first read. Like arguably one of the central questions that like frames the climate crisis for Markley. And I think like
we haven't even mentioned Tony and his girls yet either.
Right. Yes. Like Tony's whole thing is about like squaring him as a scientist with him as a dad. Right. Yeah. And like, those are the two pillars of his personality. Right. So it's across every chapter. And I knew like, Keeper has a kid, but I didn't remember him like reflecting in this way on what that means for him and like who he is as a father so explicitly. And so I just was like really struck in this chapter in particular by how some of the observations he has, I think, kind of crystallizes the series of questions that are being asked by all these characters about parenting, and that the frame of like agency, responsibility, and redeemability that Andrade offers Keeper is actually potentially a way to think about the stakes of the question for every character and like in the novel itself.
That's incredible.
That's my hot take.
It also ties into the kind of agency responsibility part too, in this kind of crucial final conversation that Keeper and Andrade have in the chapter. Because it's a bit of a pivot point where Keeper starts to get more angry. This is the bottom of 631. Andrade says, "That's good. He's a sweet boy and you have a wonderful family. You're so much luckier than you believe, Keeper." Yeah, because I got a girl and a kid I can't feed. So that very material question of parenting is still there as part of Keeper's exploration of hunger, which I think, as you've drawn out, is a little bit different, or maybe a lot different than Ash's, right? Examination of hunger and suffering.
Yeah, like he says, you don't have to ask if Toby's hungry. He peers inside the sack. His eyes light up, right?
Yeah.
Or that we get the guy, tearing a sandwich out of the cellophane right there on the street and taking down a quarter of it in one bite. It's not right. Like,
or the sex worker, right? Starling that they run into on the side of the road, who says it's easier to get heroin than a sandwich.
Yeah. But it's like, we got Ash kind of ruminating on hunger as a sort of like existential state. And like also obviously thinking like that's him mourning at the same time, right? Yes. Hunger as a kind of euphemism almost for like yearning, desiring, missing, right? Like loss.
Well, let's just keep the religious fucking, significance going. And I recognize the problems in assigning like certain Christian worldviews onto Ash, who's not a Christian, but like there's a certain notion of, self-denial as a form of mourning, suffering, repentance, worthiness, devotion. Like that's very much, and so I grew up like quasi-Catholic, like that is the Catholics love it. you know?
And that's interesting too, because for Ash, it's like a scientific experiment, but it's very clearly like tapping into these broader questions about like what it even means to be alive and to be human, but he doesn't see it in that way. And so like, I think like one way of bringing that Christian framework to assess Ash's actions is to be like, look what you're doing. Like, you're not actually being like cold and rational. You are like
engaged with the basic questions of human existence.
Yeah. Yeah.
I lied. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Why was book 4 called A Nation of Heat?
That's a great question.
So the obvious is all of the characters in various ways have to interact most directly with it's just really fucking hot everywhere, right? But that's honestly a part of it, right? The heat dome runs through the siege. Tony's is commenting on the heat in this chapter. Jackie and them talk about like where they stayed during the flood, all of that. So like obviously there's the actual literal heat that is permeating the chapters, but like what else comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I guess A Nation of Heat is also a way to think about both the siege as a kind of like engagement with the sovereign entity, a challenge to the sovereign entity, and then like the response to it as like the like devastation and the like fire, right, of the response to it as a like calcification kind of the
that's really good, the
sovereign power, but it's like sovereign capitalist, right, at the same time. So
the Zuritas and Prion of it all.
Yeah, maybe it's like a literal description of like a new era of sovereignty that isn't just political, it's like political and capital or something like that.
That's really good.
I don't know. But also like it's just hot.
It's just hot.
But the nation is, I feel like, intentional choice, right? There's something about like...
I think there's something about the Nation of Heat as doing some work to connect all of the characters and their disparate existences, right? And so to focus on Keeper, because we've been talking about him, it's actually not summer, it's winter, right? In the time in which this chapter takes place, there's actual snow on the ground in Coshocton, Ohio. But like all of these characters are dealing with the knitting together of each other in a nation amidst the heat that is constantly rising and, you know, faster than it even is here on Earth. As I'm thinking about and like was prepping my like, here's how bad it is, you know, opening week for environmental political thought. Here's our 1.4 degree Celsius 2024.
Yeah. Well, and the Keeper, like that when time is folding in on itself, we get what he was doing during the siege, which is he was elsewhere clearing out bodies, right? Yeah. Which is like an interesting way to think about the impact of the siege on people who fancy themselves not interested in politics and who weren't physically there. Not only was he not there, he wasn't like at home watching it on TV, right?
No,
like,
not at all.
Who knows if Keeper even like processes the siege as part of the story of his life? You know what I mean?
Because the way he mentions it in the chapter, it's almost external to him. So here he is, like when he first arrives at the white supremacist compound, you recognize the plastic face of Mary Randall and Victor Love and the Greeniac woman from the sex tape who melted down DC.
Yeah.
A Nation of Heat, right? DC melting down or conflagration or whatever. It's the siege in miniature or in macro is Nation of Heat.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Okay.
We solved it.
We did it.
Oh, we need titles.
We need a memorable closing title. Maybe these will be the same since our summaries were basically the same.
I don't know. You go first.
I have The Memory and The Eternal Whole.
Oh, okay.
And I'm open to whole with or without the W or both.
I went with The Suffering and the Redemption.
So it's also really good.
Yeah. I think, wait, what was yours again? The Memory
and the Eternal Whole. I think we just do all of them.
Just do all of them.
Put all of it together. Yeah.
Perfect. I like that I mean, we talked about Faulkner so long ago, but I like that. I like that the Keeper chapters have a form for the titles that the other ones do not, because I think
Ash does. It's executive summary on.
Yeah. That's true.
None of the rest of them do.
Yeah.
Well, the Years of Rain and Thunder, part 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Eventually 5.
Yeah.
What's the title of Tony's first chapter? The phase transitions of methane hydrates.
Yeah. Okay. But the other Tony chapters,
Leviathan.
Yeah. There's no consistency. We talked about the Jackie ones last time. Like, it feels like a puzzle, but maybe that's something we should trace in book 5 too, is like the cumulative like analysis or hypothesis for the chapter titles.
I love it.
Each character.
I love it.
Oh man. Well, speaking of, all we have left is book 5.
The Long Way Home. Speaking of titles.
Yeah. So we begin that with a Faruqi story. Is it in Vanity Fair again or different outlet? I don't know.
That's a great question. It is in the New Yorker.
New Yorker, okay. And then it's called A Year of Wonders on the Raveling of 2036. And then we have Shane's last chapter, Shane Drives into the Sunset, also set in 2036.
Great chapter title.
Yeah. So good.
I can't wait to have that Shane conversation with you.
I'm so excited.
5. I'm really, really excited to talk about that with you.
Yay. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on today's episode of We Are the Deluge.
And we are the Deluge.